We will handle the client presentation, Nolan, my vice president said, sliding my custom leather-bound portfolio away from my reach as if I were a child playing with an expensive watch. You are simply not senior enough to be in the room for a deal of this magnitude. Preston Croft smiled as he said it. That condescending, practiced twitch at the corner of his manicured mouth made my stomach knot. 7 months of deep structural research, 4 weeks of sleepless nights, my mathematical vision, my optimization strategy, my 78 slides, and now I was being completely erased from my own work. I nodded slowly, swallowing the bitter lump in my throat. I sat silently at my workstation as Preston and Gwen Foster, who had contributed absolutely nothing to this multi-million-dollar proposal, walked into the main executive conference room. They carried my bound hard copies under their arms, as if they had labored over them for months. They had not even bothered to change the footer containing my author-tracking initials. My name is Nolan Vance. I am 53 years old. Before today, I thought I had seen every dirty trick the corporate world had to offer. Before I continue this story that still makes my hands clench when I recall it, drop a comment below sharing where you are watching from, and subscribe if you have ever had a corporate politician steal credit for your hard work. Trust me, you will want to see how this high-stakes game played out. 2 years ago, I joined Vanguard Infrastructure Solutions as a senior principal enterprise architect. I was not an entry-level analyst trying to make a name for himself, nor was I someone who lacked professional credentials. I came into this firm with over 25 years of highly specialized expertise in real-time data infrastructure optimization and enterprise algorithm design. It is the kind of complex engineering work that makes most people's eyes glaze over during dinner conversations. But it saves multi-billion-dollar financial corporations tens of millions of dollars when executed with mathematical precision. It is not glamorous work, but it is immensely valuable to enterprise executives who understand system performance. At least, the monetary results are undeniable. What nobody tells a seasoned professional as you navigate corporate politics is that past a certain executive threshold, performance ceases to matter. It becomes entirely about who belongs to which internal country club circle. I was never in Preston Croft's circle. Preston, our vice president of client relations, spent his weekends playing golf with our chief executive officer, Winston Thorne. He wore tailored Italian suits, sported a groomed silver hairstyle, and possessed that effortless corporate charisma that made administrative assistants whisper when he walked past. What Preston did not possess was even a fundamental understanding of enterprise data architecture. Not that his profound ignorance ever stopped him from taking center stage to present complex systems. The $11.8 million Blackstone Asset Management contract was not just another corporate account for Vanguard Infrastructure Solutions. It was the account. It was the landmark deal that would elevate our regional consulting firm into a nationally recognized powerhouse. It was the contract that would dictate annual performance bonuses, board promotions, and undoubtedly a few strategic corporate terminations under standard restructuring guidelines like the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act under Title 29 United States Code. Section 2101. Vanguard had been aggressively pursuing Blackstone for nearly 4 years before my arrival, meeting with complete failure at every turn. That was until I personally analyzed their public infrastructure disclosures and identified a fundamental structural flaw in their transactional processing pipeline. It was a subtle, highly complex synchronization inefficiency that was draining approximately $4.9 million from their bottom line annually. I discovered it buried beneath terabytes of routine operational logs. The exact type of systemic anomaly you only spot after spending 25 years learning precisely where operational friction hides. This analysis is exceptional, Nolan. My dire ex-supervisor, Evelyn Harper, had whispered 3 months ago when I first presented my preliminary findings to her in her private office. Let us refine this complete framework before presenting it to executive leadership. I had trusted Evelyn. She was the director of enterprise strategy and had been instrumental in recruiting me to Vanguard. She knew what it meant to fight for professional credibility in an industry dominated by slick corporate posture. For 7 long months, I virtually lived at my desk. I missed my wedding anniversary dinner, worked through a severe fever with a bottle of anti-inflammatories beside my keyboard, and poured every ounce of my experience into the project. I developed the entire diagnostic methodology, structured the zero-loss migration protocol, calculated exact multi-year financial return projections, and designed a 12-step phased implementation framework engineered to eliminate operational downtime completely. Last week, when news broke that Blackstone's entire executive evaluation committee, including their notoriously ruthless chief technology officer, demanded an in-person presentation at our headquarters, the office exploded into celebration. This was our definitive enterprise moment. Outstanding effort, team. Preston Croft had announced during our division meeting, flashing his white smile. Evelyn and I will finalize the master client presentation strategy. We need our absolute polished executive presence in that boardroom. I had sat in that meeting, waiting for my presentation role to be specified. Naturally, I assumed I would present the technical core. The technical questions from Blackstone's engineering directors would be intricate, granular, and demanding. They would require someone who understood the mathematical underpinnings of the architecture, yet the meeting adjourned without my name ever being mentioned. Later that afternoon, Evelyn stopped by my cubicle. Her hesitant posture told me everything before she opened her mouth. Preston insists that we keep the boardroom presentation team restricted strictly to senior vice president level leadership, she said softly, avoiding direct eye contact. It is about executive optics and brand alignment. You know how these high-stakes pitches operate. It is my architecture, Evelyn, I said, keeping my voice remarkably low and controlled despite the surge of heat in my chest. How do they intend to handle deep technical inquiries from Blackstone's chief technology officer? Evelyn looked deeply uncomfortable, smoothing her corporate blazer. I will be present to manage those inquiries. You have briefed me thoroughly, and I have your slide deck. Preston feels extraordinarily strong about maintaining a unified executive front. And you? I asked, looking straight into her eyes. How do you feel about erasing the author of the system? She did not answer directly. She merely patted my shoulder gently and offered a tired corporate cliché. Your time will come, Nolan. This is simply how the enterprise game is played. The game. It was always referred to as the game by people who preferred politics over performance. On the morning of the major presentation, I arrived at 7:15 in the morning. Evelyn had requested that I remain seated at my desk nearby, acting as emergency backup in case they needed to call me in to clarify a minor point. We both recognized it for what it was, a condescending token gesture. I watched from my desk as the Blackstone delegation arrived. 5 high-level executives in bespoke charcoal suits, led by a sharp woman in her mid-50s with cropped gray hair and eyes that seemed to cut through pretense instantly. That was Eleanor Shaw, Blackstone's legendary chief technology officer, known across the financial industry for dissecting weak corporate pitches in minutes. Preston greeted them in the lobby with practiced, oily charm. Evelyn stood half a step behind him, projecting polished professionalism. They ushered the delegation into our flagship boardroom, a massive room featuring floor-to-ceiling soundproof glass walls. Everyone on the floor could see everything happening inside, even if we could not hear a word. My work, all 78 slides of precise architectural logic, sat bound in custom leather covers with the Vanguard logo stamped in gold leaf across the front. My name did not appear anywhere on those covers. 10 minutes into the meeting, I watched Preston Croft gesturing animatedly toward my architectural flowcharts. 20 minutes in, Gwen Foster was pointing at my financial modeling diagrams as if she had derived the equations herself. 30 minutes in, I observed Eleanor Shaw leaning forward, her eyes narrowing as she scrutinized the printed materials, and that was the precise moment a cold, motionless calm settled over me. It was not panic, it was not blind rage, it was absolute clarity. They were presenting my work, but their presentation contained a fatal void. 4 days ago, after Evelyn had confirmed my exclusion from the boardroom, I had made a deliberate strategic adjustment to the final pitchmaster files, knowing that my work constituted original proprietary creation protected under federal copyright provisions. Under Title 17, United States Code Section 106, I had deliberately omitted the core mathematical formula, the proprietary 12-step data synchronization algorithm that made the entire migration framework functional. Without that single 12-step algorithm, the entire 78-slide presentation was an impressive theoretical exercise that would collapse into total data corruption if executed in a live enterprise environment. The solution existed nowhere in Vanguard's servers. It was not documented in their shared network folders. It existed solely inside my mind and in a single encrypted file on my personal offline drive. I had rationalized it initially as security compliance to protect trade secrets. But sitting 30 feet away, watching two corporate imposters claim my intellectual labor, I knew the absolute truth. It was my insurance policy. It was my ironclad guarantee that before this day ended, every executive in that room would be forced to acknowledge my existence. 45 minutes into the presentation, the crisis erupted inside the glass boardroom. I watched Eleanor Shaw raise her hand, abruptly interrupting Preston Croft mid-sentence. Her facial expression shifted from professional interest to sharp skepticism. She tapped her copy of the portfolio aggressively, pointing at a specific flow diagram. Preston's confident, smooth smile froze. He looked over at Gwen, who frantically began turning pages in her binder. Evelyn shifted uncomfortably in her chair, searching her notes with visible panic. Eleanor Shaw leaned back, crossed her arms, and shook her head with clear disappointment. Suddenly, every head inside the boardroom turned in unison. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass partition, their eyes locked directly onto me, sitting at my workstation. My computer monitor flashed with an urgent high-priority notification from Evelyn Harper Bydroom. Immediately. Bring your source files. My heart beat with a steady rhythmic pulse as I stood up from my chair. Surrounding colleagues peered over their cubicle walls with intense curiosity as I walked the longest 30 feet of my corporate career. I smoothed my dark gray blazer, adjusted my tie, took a deep, deliberate breath, and opened the heavy glass door. "Ah, here is Nolan," Preston Croft said, offering a strained, panicked smile that failed to reach his hardened eyes. Nolan is one of our senior technical contributors who assisted in gathering some of the foundational data for our proposal. Assisted in gathering some of the foundational data. Not authored the entire architecture. Not engineered the financial recovery strategy. Just assisted with data collection. Eleanor Shaw ignored Preston entirely. She turned her sharp gaze directly upon me, her posture commanding complete authority. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice cutting through the tense atmosphere of the room. "Your vice president and director appear completely incapable of explaining the core mathematical mechanism outlined on slide 42. Specifically, how your architecture prevents catastrophic transaction corruption during the secondary synchronization phase." She tapped the printed portfolio in front of her. "The concept is presented here as a guaranteed zero-loss transition, but the underlying algorithm is entirely missing from the technical appendix. Without that precise mathematical proof, this proposal is a multi-million-dollar gamble that no prudent chief technology officer would ever authorize." The boardroom fell into dead silence. Preston's neck flushed a deep, mottled red. Evelyn looked at me with an expression hovering between a desperate plea for help and sheer panic. This was the pivotal junction. I could play the obedient corporate soldier, hand over the missing logic, save Preston's reputation, and allow them to take credit for an $11.8 million contract while I received a pat on the back. Or I could enforce the absolute truth. I pulled out a leather chair directly across from Eleanor Shaw. Not at the side of the table, and certainly not standing subserviently by the door like an assistant. I sat down with unshakable composure, forcing Preston Croft to shift his chair awkwardly to make room for me. The proprietary synchronization algorithm was intentionally withheld from the printed slide deck. "Miss Shaw," I said calmly, looking her straight in the eyes. "The algorithm utilizes a 12-step proprietary mathematical framework that combines real-time transaction queuing with tiered cryptographic hashing. It is far too intricate to be reduced to static slide bullet points, and presenting it without direct architectural supervision would be completely irresponsible." Eleanor Shaw's eyebrow thus rose with immediate intrigue. You personally engineered this 12-step framework? I created the entire architectural framework, the diagnostic analysis, and the implementation model you have evaluated today, I stated clearly, without a hint of hesitation. You could have heard a sheet of paper drop onto the carpet. Preston cleared his throat loudly, preparing to interject with defensive corporate damage control. But Eleanor Shaw held up a single firm hand, silencing him instantly without even shifting her gaze from me. "Perhaps, Mr. Vance," she said, her tone transforming into one of sharp executive focus, "you would do us the honor of walking us through this 12-step algorithm yourself." For the next 25 minutes, I took absolute control of the room. I walked over to the large electronic whiteboard, grabbed a marker, and began laying out the mathematical equations and structural flowcharts of my 12-step framework. I detailed how the system isolated micro-latency spikes, how the cryptographic hashing prevented transaction collisions, and how the operational fallback protocols guaranteed zero data loss. I answered granular technical questions from Eleanor Shaw and her senior infrastructure directors with effortless precision, drawing upon my 25 years of deep domain experience. With every equation I wrote, I saw respect and clarity light up in Eleanor Shaw's eyes. The Blackstone delegation was no longer dealing with corporate figureheads who rehearsed canned pitch decks. They were communicating directly with the architect, who understood every single nut and bolt of the system. Preston Croft and Evelyn Harper sat in agonizing, humiliated silence. They could not contribute a single word. They could not even follow the advanced mathematical logic being discussed on the whiteboard. Their complete ignorance of the very material they had tried to steal was exposed to the largest prospect in our firm's history. When I completed the technical demonstration, Eleanor Shaw leaned back in her leather armchair and slowly tapped her pen against her notepad. "Well," she said, her voice echoing in the silent boardroom, "that clarifies our technical concerns entirely. That was an extraordinary presentation, Mr. Vance." She turned slowly toward Preston Croft, her tone chilling by 20 degrees. "Mr. Croft, I am thoroughly fascinated to understand why Mr. Vance was not leading this pitch from the very first minute, considering he is undeniably the sole architect of this entire enterprise strategy." Preston's face contorted into a painful, unnatural smile as he tried frantically to regain control of his narrative. "We value all of our technical contributors at Vanguard, Miss Shaw," he stammered, his polished composure crumbling rapidly. "However, corporate protocol dictates that our senior executive suite handles primary client engagements of this magnitude. Historical precedent has demonstrated clear executive structure. In my extensive experience as a chief technology officer," Eleanor Shaw interrupted sharply, "the individuals who actually perform the complex work deliver infinitely superior presentations compared to executive suits who merely read slides." She turned her attention completely back to me, ignoring Preston's flushed face. "Mr. Vance, if Blackstone decides to award this $11.8 million contract to Vanguard, will you personally serve as the designated enterprise project lead with absolute operational authority over implementation?" Before Preston could attempt to speak on my behalf, I looked Eleanor Shaw directly in the eyes. "That would be my absolute condition for moving forward, Miss Shaw," I replied firmly. I could visibly hear Preston's jaw clench so hard his teeth squeaked. Eleanor Shaw nodded with crisp approval. "Excellent," she said, standing up to signal the conclusion of the meeting. "Because Blackstone has zero interest in paying millions of dollars to corporate figureheads. We partner exclusively with the minds who build the machinery." The Blackstone Evaluation Committee stood up, exchanging warm handshakes with me. As Eleanor Shaw reached the doorway, she produced a sleek black business card and placed it directly into my hand, skipping Preston and Evelyn entirely. "Contact my direct office line tomorrow morning, Mr. Vance," she said with a knowing smile. "I have several additional structural questions regarding implementation timelines that I prefer to discuss directly with you." The boardroom door clicked shut behind the departing delegation, leaving me standing alone in the quiet room with Preston Croft and Evelyn Harper. The silence that followed was suffocating. Preston's face had turned from red to a dangerous shade of purple, a thick vein throbbing visibly along his temple. Evelyn kept her eyes glued to the conference table, unable to face me. What in the hell do you think you just accomplished in there, Nolan? Preston hissed, slamming his heavy leather folder onto the glass table with a crack that echoed off the walls. You deliberately sabotaged our official executive presentation by withholding critical proprietary data. I faced him with complete, unshakable calm, keeping my hands resting loosely in my pockets. I structured the presentation materials to ensure that complex mathematical architecture was presented with absolute precision by the author rather than fumbled by someone who cannot explain basic database synchronization. It was an architectural judgment call, a judgment call. Preston's voice cracked with rising fury as he took a step toward me. You deliberately made me look like an incompetent fool in front of the largest prospective client in this firm's history. You accomplished that entirely on your own, Preston, I replied, my voice cool and steady. I solved Blackstone's $4.9 million operational flaw and saved an $11.8 million deal that you were seconds away from blowing. Isn't securing enterprise revenue what we are paid to do? Evelyn finally looked up, her expression filled with defensive indignation. Nolan, you had an ethical obligation to inform us of the full algorithm parameters prior to the meeting. We could have prepared properly. Prepared how, Evelyn? I asked, turning my gaze onto her. By having me write out an executive cheat sheet so Preston could pretend he understood the mathematics. Or would you have finally invited me into the room if you had known you lacked the intellectual capability to execute the pitch without me? Neither of them answered. The truth hung heavy in the air between us. I picked up my whiteboard markers, gathered my personal notebook, and turned to leave. Preston stepped directly into my path, his eyes burning with vengeful malice. "This is far from over, Vance," he whispered under his breath. "You just committed corporate suicide in this firm." I looked down at him with 53 years of earned wisdom and zero fear. "You are entirely correct about one thing, Preston," I said softly. "It is far from over." Walking back through the open-plan office felt entirely surreal. Dozens of colleagues stared at me from behind their monitors with wide eyes. While they could not hear the specific dialogue through the soundproof glass, they had all witnessed the visual power shift inside the boardroom. They had seen the vice president humiliated and the client shaking hands exclusively with the senior apes architects. At precisely 2:45 in the afternoon, my inbox chimed with a high-priority notification from Corporate Human Resources and the Office of the Chief Executive Officer subject. Urgent Conduct and Compliance Review. Mandatory attendance at 3:15 p.m., 3 hours. That was how long it had taken Preston Croft to mobilize Vanguard's administrative bureaucracy against me. He was invoking formal grievance procedures, accusing me of gross insubordination, intentional sabotage of corporate assets, and breach of employment duties. I did not panic. Wounded executive egos are incredibly dangerous, particularly in men who have spent their entire careers relying on political posture rather than tangible skill. But I was no longer the passive employee who had allowed management to erase his name. I spent the next 30 minutes gathering immutable digital evidence. I compiled time-stamped server commit logs, early research drafts, initial email submissions to Evelyn Harper from 7 months prior in digital, the metadata proving my sole authorship of the entire Blackstone architecture under federal copyright standards. I saved redundant copies to an offline encrypted flash drive and emailed complete compliance archives to my personal address. At precisely 3:14 in the afternoon, I walked to the executive suite on the top floor and entered Chief Executive Officer Winston Thorne's corner office. Winston Thorne sat behind a massive mahogany desk. At 71 years old, he had built Vanguard Infrastructure Solutions from a 3-person startup 25 years ago into a multi-million-dollar firm. He possessed a legendary reputation for being ruthless, pragmatic, and fiercely protective of company revenue. Sitting on the leather couch to his left were Preston Croft, Evelyn Harper, and Corporate Human Resources Director Diana Cross. "Take a seat, Nolan," Winston Thorne said, his voice deep, gravelly, and entirely unreadable. "We are here to address extremely serious allegations regarding your conduct during the Blackstone pitch today." I sat down in the center leather armchair. placing my neatly organized folder of documentation onto the glass coffee table. I welcome the opportunity to establish absolute clarity, Mr. Thorne. Preston jumped in immediately, his voice dripping with theatrical executive outrage. Winston, this employee intentionally sabotaged our flagship presentation. He intentionally withheld critical technical specifications from our client binders for the sole purpose of humiliating executive leadership and hijacking the meeting. This is a clear breach of fiduciary duty and grounds for immediate termination for cause without severance. Is that an accurate assessment of your actions, Nolan? Winston Thorne asked, fixing his sharp blue eyes on me. I took a slow, deliberate breath, leaning back comfortably in my chair. What is accurate, Mr. Thorne, is that I spent 7 months engineering every single line of data architecture, financial forecasting, and operational modeling for the Blackstone proposal. What is accurate is that 4 days ago, Preston Croft and Evelyn Harper explicitly excluded me from the presentation team, claiming I lacked executive seniority. And what is accurate is that the proprietary 12-step algorithm is a complex intellectual asset that required direct expert presentation to prevent catastrophic execution failure. Sheer insubordination, Preston shouted, slamming his fist onto his knee. He admitted to manipulating company pitch materials. Let him finish, Preston. Winston Thorne commanded with a sharp glance that instantly silenced the vice president. I opened my documentation binder. I have compiled time-stamped proof demonstrating that I am the sole architect of the Blackstone solution. I have also documented that neither Mr. Croft nor Ms. Harper contributed a single line of technical logic to this proposal. They attempted to sell an enterprise solution they did not understand, and when Blackstone's chief technology officer asked a fundamental technical question, their complete lack of technical competence threatened to destroy an $11.8 million account. Human Resources Director Diana Cross looked deeply uneasy, adjusting her glasses as she reviewed the documentation copies I handed her. Evelyn Harper stared silently at the rug. Preston's face had turned an alarming shade of crimson. Are you attempting to threaten this executive team, Mr. Vance? Preston growled defensively. I am establishing undeniable operational facts, I replied with complete composure. The fact is that I discovered Blackstone's $4.9 million operational flaw. I built the solution, and today, I saved Vanguard from public humiliation when your executive presentation collapsed. Winston Thorne leaned forward, resting his elbows on his desk and lacing his fingers together. He studied me with intense scrutiny. Why did you leave the algorithm out of the printed binders, Nolan? Let us set aside corporate rhetoric and speak candidly. The office fell completely quiet. This was the moment of absolute truth, because I knew that if I included it in the binders, Preston Croft would have wiped my name from the project entirely and presented my intellectual labor as his own, I said calmly and plainly. After 25 years in this industry, I refuse to allow corporate politicians to erase my professional worth. Was my action strategic? Absolutely. Was it unlawful? No. Under Title 17 United States Code Section 106, original technical documentation remains protected original work until formally assigned under clear enterprise terms. No harm was done to Vanguard. In fact, Blackstone is currently preparing to sign the contract exclusively because I stepped into that room. Winston's eyes narrowed slightly. That is quite a bold admission of calculated leverage. It is the absolute truth, I said. I have zero interest in playing corporate political games anymore. Preston seized upon the statement, turning frantically to the chief executive officer. You hear him, Winston? He admits to using company client engagements for personal leverage. This violates every employment compliance policy on our books. We must terminate him immediately. Winston Thorne raised a single hand, cutting Preston off mid-sentence. He turned his gaze toward Human Resources Director, Diana Cross. Has Eleanor Shaw or anyone from Blackstone's executive office communicated with us since the pitch concluded? Diana Cross cleared her throat nervously, checking her tablet. Yes, Mr. Thorne. Chief Technology Officer Eleanor Shaw sent an official executive memorandum to your office 45 minutes ago. Winston leaned back. And what does Ms. Shaw state? Diana Cross glanced cautiously at Preston before reading from her screen. Ms. Shaw expressed unprecedented enthusiasm for the architectural framework. However, she explicitly stipulated that Blackstone's execution of the $11.8 million agreement is strictly contingent upon Nolan Vance being designated as the lead enterprise principal, with complete operational authority over the project. Furthermore, she requested that Mr. Vance serve as our primary point of contact for all contractual negotiations going forward. Preston Croft's mouth opened in shock, but no sound came out. He looked as if he had been struck by a physical blow. Winston Thorne stared at Preston and Evelyn for a long, heavy moment. Then he pointed toward the door. "Preston, Evelyn, Diana, leave us. I am going to speak with Mr. Vance alone." The look of utter humiliation and defeated fury on Preston Croft's face was a sight I will cherish for the rest of my life. He stood up stiffly, adjusted his suit jacket with trembling hands, and walked out of the office, followed silently by Evelyn and Diana Cross. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut, leaving me alone with the Chief Executive Officer of Vanguard Infrastructure Solutions. Winston Thorne reached into his desk drawer, pulled out a box of cigars, selected one, and lit it slowly. He blew a ring of blue smoke toward the ceiling before fixing his sharp gaze back on me. "That was a remarkably high-stakes gamble you played in the boardroom today, Nolan," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "It was not a gamble to me, Mr. Thorne," I replied calmly. "It was the defense of my professional dignity and intellectual property." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough. But you must understand that intentionally withholding technical data from a client presentation, regardless of your personal justification, creates immense operational risk for this firm. I understand that allowing executive vice presidents to claim credit for complex architecture they cannot explain creates even greater existential risk. For this firm," I countered evenly, "when senior management prioritizes political credit over technical competence, it breaches their basic fiduciary duty to company shareholders." A faint, unmistakable smirk touched the corner of Winston Thorne's mouth. "You certainly do not back down easily, do you, Vance?" "No," I said simply. "At 53 years old, I have earned the right to stand my ground firmly." Winston leaned forward across his desk, resting his forearms on the polished wood. "Here is how we are going to handle this situation, Nolan. You are going to lead the Blackstone implementation, because frankly, Blackstone has given us zero alternative. Eleanor Shaw made it abundantly clear that if you are not leading this project, Vanguard does not get the contract. You will report directly to me on this account," completely bypassing Preston Croft. I processed his words carefully. "And what regarding my status within Vanguard moving forward? If you deliver this project flawlessly, if you bring in that $11.8 million contract and save Blackstone their $4.9 million annually, we will completely restructure your compensation and executive title," Winston stated. "But if you fail to execute, this conversation will have a drastically different outcome." "Understood," I replied. As I stood up to exit the office, Winston added one final question. "Is that 12-step algorithm properly documented in our secure enterprise repository now, Mr. Vance?" I offered a slight smile. "It will be fully integrated by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning." "Good," Winston said, puffing his cigar. "Because, while I respect your tactical brilliance, I have zero desire to remain vulnerable to individual leverage. Do not attempt a stunt like this again." "There will be no need, Mr. Thorne," I replied. "A single, decisive demonstration of competence is usually sufficient when leadership is paying attention." The next 3 weeks were an extraordinary period of corporate realignment. News of what had transpired in the executive suite rippled through Vanguard's offices. Preston Croft avoided me entirely, taking a sudden 2-week administrative leave that everyone on the floor recognized as a soft corporate suspension. Evelyn Harper attempted an awkward, apologetic conversation by the break room coffee machine, attempting to frame her actions as organizational pressure. "I fought for you to be included in that initial meeting, Nolan," she said, her voice lacking any real conviction. "You did not fight hard enough, Evelyn," I replied calmly. "And there is a profound difference between compliance and leadership." She flinched slightly and walked away without another word. The only colleague who approached me with genuine transparency was Sanjay Patel, a brilliant 32-year-old database engineer who had spent 3 years being systematically overlooked by Preston's executive clique. "It is about time someone exposed the political posturing in this building," Sanjay said, shaking my hand warmly. "If you need a lead infrastructure engineer for the Blackstone team, I want to join your enterprise group." Sanjay became my first official team selection as I built out the enterprise implementation division. 1 week after our initial boardroom confrontation, Eleanor Shaw requested a private executive video conference with me. "Mr. Vance," she said when the secure connection established, "I have thoroughly reviewed your finalized technical architecture. It is absolute masterwork." "Thank you, Miss Shaw," I replied. She leaned into her camera. "I am going to be entirely transparent with you, Nolan. Blackstone is executing the $11.8 million contract with Vanguard today. However, we have mandated 3 non-negotiable clauses in the master service agreement." I listened attentively. "First, you are contractually named as the lead executive architect for the entire 3-year term. Second, you will conduct direct quarterly technical reviews with our board of directors. And third," she paused, offering a subtle smile, "we have included a specialized key person exit clause. If Vanguard undergoes structural reorganization or attempts to remove you from this project, Blackstone retains the absolute right to void the contract ab initio and retain your services directly as an independent master consultant." I sat back in my chair, absorbing the magnitude of her words. That was not merely a contract condition, it was an invincible corporate safety net. "You are remarkably thorough, Miss Shaw," I said. "I recognize rare technical genius when I see it, Nolan," she replied. "And I always protect my enterprise investments." The following Monday morning, Winston Thorne convened a mandatory all-hands company meeting in the main auditorium. Before 200 employees, he officially announced the signing of the $11.8 million Blackstone contract, the largest single deal in Vanguard's history. He then announced my official promotion to Vice President of Enterprise Architecture, reporting directly to the Chief Executive Officer, along with a performance-based bonus structure tied directly to contract milestones. I stood near the side of the stage, watching Preston Croft's face as the room erupted into applause. His facial expression was a frozen, rigid mask of suppressed rage. He knew his political reign over technical operations was officially over. Over the next 8 months, my team, composed of Sanjay Patel and 3 other highly talented analysts whom management had previously sidelined, executed the Blackstone migration with flawless precision. We eliminated their transaction latency entirely, saving Blackstone over 9% beyond our initial financial projections. Word of our successful implementation spread rapidly across the financial sector. Within 8 months, 2 major institutional funds approached Vanguard, requesting our specialized services under the explicit condition that my division lead their infrastructure overhauls. The combined value of those new enterprise contracts exceeded $16.5 million. Preston Croft eventually quietly resigned from Vanguard to take a minor regional sales role at a smaller firm, a move that everyone recognized as a total career demotion. Evelyn Harper was reassigned to administrative compliance, stripped of her strategic authority. As for myself, my entire approach to corporate life transformed. I built a division founded on absolute merit, transparent attribution, and relentless technical rigor. Every single engineer on my team received direct credit for their intellectual work. No figureheads, no stolen decks, no political erasure. One evening, 8 months after that fateful pitch, I stood on the balcony of my top-floor office, looking out over the illuminated city skyline. I thought back to the morning when Preston Croft had carelessly slid my leather portfolio away from me and told me I was not senior enough to be in the room. A single decision to stand up for my worth, to utilize my legal rights, and to refuse to be erased had completely altered the trajectory of my career. I reached into my desk drawer and picked up Eleanor Shaw's original black business card, which still sat beside my keyboard. I had never needed to use the emergency exit clause she provided, but knowing it existed had given me the unwavering leverage to transform my environment rather than retreat from it. Sometimes, the ultimate corporate victory is not escaping the system that tried to diminish you. It is standing your ground, wielding your competence like a blade, and reshaping the system until it is forced to recognize your true worth. If you are watching this today, and you have ever been sidelined, overlooked, or had your hard work stolen by corporate politicians, remember this. Your skill is your ultimate leverage. The truth has an extraordinary way of demanding to be heard. You simply must be brave enough to step into the room and let it speak. What is your story? Have you ever had to stand your ground and fight for the credit you earned? Drop a comment below. I read every response, and I want to know I am not alone in this fight.